Hey guys, really hope you enjoyed this video with Eric from St. Isidora Catholic Worker Farm. Please state your first and last name to the camera.
My name is Eric Anglada.
Alright. So what kind of inspired you to, so this is a beautiful property that you have here, what kind of inspired you to make this property a Catholic Worker Farm?
Well, I guess I can share about my journey to this place, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah.
I grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And when I was 18, instead of going directly to college, I decided to travel the country for about 7 months, mostly by a Greyhound bus. Had some grand adventures that way, and came across the Catholic Worker Movement. I was actually staying in a homeless shelter in Phoenix, Arizona, and someone said, "You gotta check out the Catholic Worker Movement." So I cold called Solidarity House in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and said, "Would you be willing to have me come and live there for a few weeks and volunteer and learn what I can from you all?" And they said, "Of course, come on over." And so Steve and Tim ran that house and had rice and beans for the neighborhood every single night. About 30 people around the dinner table and a handful of guys living with them, and just had a transformative, really powerful experience. And I also knew that I really loved being outside. I really enjoyed kind of just simple manual labor. And so one of the things that I was intrigued by is, as I was learning about the Catholic Worker Movement, was one of the principles is the dignity of manual labor. And so I spent my early years in the movement in urban houses of hospitality, but I gradually came to learn about more and more Catholic worker farms, and began to understand how important food is to our world and to the living world that we kind of live amid, that healthy food creates healthy ecologies and healthy people. And that Peter Morin believed that ultimately the land was the solution to the ills of our age. And so from there, I was living at St. Jude Catholic Worker House in Champaign, Illinois, and began to be really intrigued with this idea and possibility of, like, Peter Morin, what he called an agronomic university, where we combine learning and life on the land and spirituality and community, and was invited to New Hope Catholic Worker Farm, about 10 miles south of Dubuque, Iowa, where I spent 7-8 years. And ultimately, because of zoning and flooding issues, our 4 adults discerned that we needed to find some land that was less vulnerable in this age of climate crisis and extreme weather events. And so we wanted to create a place here, kind of refuge, a haven for people, for animals, for creatures, to really kind of extend our sense of community with the rest of creation. So we do a little bit of hospitality to humans. We do, we have multiple different kinds of species living here, cows and chickens and bees and birds and, thousands of different kinds of critters. So we've been here over 9 years, and we feel like in this world, as always, it's important to create places of community, of hospitality, of an alternative to consumerism and capitalism.
And I'm aware that Peter Morin and Dorothy Day did not set a straight arrow, per se, on like instructions or how to for a Catholic worker house or farm.
Right.
How would you say that your farm in particular kind of follows the path of Peter Morin and Dorothy Day?
Yeah, Peter Morin liked to call the movement not an organization but an organism, kind of growing and taking different shape according to the local needs and to the age that we live in, and said we always need to be updating our thought, every 20 years. And so Peter saw that, he originally thought the Catholic worker movement would be mostly a movement of communities on the land, and that there might be some communities in the city being sent from the country into the city. But ultimately, over the years, what came to be most popular and what people were able to hold on to most were the cities and houses of hospitality and soup kitchens. Those are very real, tangible things. But there's always been this thread within the movement of returning to the land and finding a way back into a healthy relationship with the soil. And Peter Morin said that, you cannot have a healthy culture without a proper regard for the soil. So that's a lot of what we do here too, is in our day-to-day work, is tending to the soil and improving the life and abundance and vitality of the soil. And he liked to use the expression, the Green Revolution. And the Green Revolution is a term that he used to refer to the Irish monks of the early medieval era. And he said, amid the collapse of the Roman Empire, the Irish monks created these communities of what he called cult, culture, and cultivation. And Peter Morin had a penchant for kind of alliteration and catchy phrases, and cult in the sense of the older sense of kind of a reverence, a worship, a spirituality. And culture was study and philosophy and learning and developing a critique of society. And then cultivation, of course, being tending to the land. So he saw in those Irish monks a kind of recipe, organic recipe, that in this time where he believes, very much his world was shaped by the Depression and the collapse of capitalism in the 1930s. He said, as we face the collapse of capitalism, as we see the undoing of our economic order, however it unfolds, that we need these places of refuge. We need these islands of light, I believe he called them. So in our own very small way, very imperfect, we try to embrace this idea of building a new society within the shell of the old. And so on a very small scale, what we're doing here is just trying to create just a little bit of an alternative. And our work, and Dorothy Day, who always injected the Catholic worker movement with this sense of social justice, with activism. She was arrested, I believe, 12 times, and the last one being standing with the farm workers in 1975. Or 1973, I believe, and when she was 75 years old. And so this also, like, building this alternative on the land here, but also we're not an Amish community. We're not just insular and self-contained. So having this inspiration from the Catholic worker, that we're always engaged in the wider society. And so we're just continuing to kind of find our way and deepen into the land here and continue to learn ways to engage the land, but also trying to just continue to find ways to engage the wider world.
And what would you say some of the struggles of running a farm like this is? I mean, you have kids, the livestock, the farm, there's a lot of moving components there.
Right, and none of us grew up on farms. So the four adults who are kind of the permanent community members here, we're all from a suburb or a small town, and we are learning as we go. And we've been living together for over 15 years now, I think, and have been living most of that time in community, rurally on the land. And so we've learned a lot, and we still have a lot that we don't know, and so we rely on neighbors and books and sometimes sometimes the internet and people who can mentor us and teach us. And, we have, for example, last fall our cow suddenly died. So we've, we're without milk for several months because we couldn't find a replacement cow. And I think the challenge now too of this climate crisis that we're in is that every season is weird, and it's sort of the question becomes, in what way is this season going to be weird? And so, for example, this year, I don't know if I've ever experienced a very dry spring leading into an extremely wet July and August. Usually that's the time when we dry out and we can stay on top of weeding and mulching. So the amount of growth, which in some ways was great, we've planted dozens, if not hundreds, of trees and shrubs here, so we got an amazing amount of growth. But the gardens are teeming with abundant produce, but we're dealing with some rotting, we're dealing with just abundant weeds. So every year is just kind of different, and so it's figuring out how do we adapt, how do we stay resilient, how do we just continue to find ways to sustain ourselves and to share the abundance of the land with the wider community as well. But yeah, it's with some really, really hot days and really high humidity, and just wildfire smoke was an issue here this summer, and there's just each year has its own, and that is the beauty too. Is we get to kind of start over next year. So every year is a kind of new opportunity to learn and face different challenges.
And so will you kind of explain to people kind of the different components of this farm and kind of what makes you a Catholic worker farm opposed to just a farm?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I do say, that I don't consider myself a farmer as much as a Catholic worker farmer. And so, as you said, the Catholic worker movement, there's no single recipe per se, but there are these shared kind of ingredients and living in community. So there's, for most of the past year, we've been a community of 9. Right now we're a community of 6, hosting visitors such as yourself and others, but 6 kind of permanent community members, and share in morning prayer Monday through Friday. We have shared meals. We have shared work on the land here. So we have no-till organic gardens, a small herd of cows, flock of chickens, some bees. And we also incorporate work for justice and activism. And so we hardly sell anything from the farm here. Mostly our abundance goes to migrants and refugees in the area. And we do occasional hospitality, and the dignity of manual labor is really important here. So all these ingredients within the Catholic worker that Peter Moore and Dorothy Day said, here's our kind of fundamental vision of community, spirituality, hospitality, activism, justice, spirituality, all these things that for us are incarnated in this rural setting. We're not completely, the closest decent sized town is about 15 miles away in Dubuque. So we still want to be connected to the wider community. We also are engaged in activism around indigenous land return, and anti-war and environmental issues. And Brenna, my wife, has been arrested maybe 10 times doing civil disobedience. So that element of kind of confronting the powers that be is an occasional but fundamental part of Catholic worker vision. Is we're not just charity workers, we're not just living a self-enclosed life, but we're actually trying to, in our very small and imperfect way, to transform or be a part of the transformation of the wider society.
And with trying to incorporate, or so with you going to demonstrations, what are some of those? So is it mainly anti-war, like what are some of the demonstrations?
Sure.
Do you want to go? You don't have to go into it.
Yeah, no, I can talk about that. And our activism has evolved and shifted a little bit over the years. That's 20 years ago or 25 years ago. Some of my earliest activism was going to the School of the Americas protest, which was in Georgia, a school that was training Latin American soldiers in basically how to overthrow kind of democratic, more socially just governments in Latin America. So my experience began with there. I was part of I remember standing with 200,000 people against the war in Iraq in 2003. And every spring, the Catholic Worker in the Midwest has an action that we collectively do, and those have taken different shape over the years, but those have been around immigration, nuclear weapons, drone warfare. Not too far from here, there was a Blackwater training center that was training security, non-military folks to go over to Iraq. There was a few hundred miles north of here, they were mining sand from this region for fracking. We've also been involved in indigenous-led movements in northern Wisconsin with Anishinaabe women in particular leading the movement against the Enbridge Line 3 pipeline. And Brenna was involved in 2019 with Allison, who you interviewed today, who they shut down a pipeline and were arrested and spent 2 nights in jail and had a trial and were ultimately found guilty. And we went out to Standing Rock in North Dakota very briefly. So Black Lives Matter, for sure. There was an incredibly powerful action in Minneapolis in 2017 that Catholic workers gathered in the streets, and about 20 people were arrested, including Brenna, for the non-indictment of the police officers who shot and killed Jamar Clark, a black man in Minneapolis. So in recent years, the Catholic Worker has been trying to grapple, along with much of the wider society, with legacy and history of racial injustice in this country. And those gatherings of Catholic workers every spring around some sort of resistance issue in 2015, 2016, and 2017 were all around racial justice and anti-racism. And so I think that has set us on a little bit of a different course, that we still maintain our anti-nuclear and anti-war ideals, but we've really expanded, incorporating solidarity and justice for Black and Indigenous folks.
And as far as living on the farm, I always ask this to people with children on the farm. Do you ever find it difficult having, in a sense, with the hospitality and all the different moving parts, and then also having time for the family? And
Brennan and I don't. Micah and Claire are Peter and Mary Kay's kids, so it's a little bit different for us.
Yeah. Okay. So then, what are some of your favorite parts of this farm?
One of my favorite things about living here is the ability to live within the seasons, so kind of directly and intimately, and the time of year shaping the work that I do. And our life looks very different from July compared to January. And so for a lot of people, they're just going to an office, and whether there's snow on the ground or it's 95 degrees, their work is largely the same. And I do like that there's a lot of variation and getting to really experience the land in a direct way. So that's one of my favorite things about living here, and just the beauty too. I grew up in a suburb. I never have lived rurally until I moved to Iowa, and I was a little nervous about it. You know, I was like, I think I'm gonna love living rurally, but I've never done it before. And so now I'm like, I don't know if I could ever live in a city again. You know, the sounds of the land here are absolutely healing. You know, there's a reason why in Japan doctors, you know, give recommendations of spending time in the forest as a way to heal. So I believe that the land heals, and that this work of being able to heal the land and increase the amount of life and abundance within the land too, and planting kinds of species that can really benefit lots and lots of different creatures. That work of healing the land in turn heals me.
And so this is a segment of the interview I call fun questions. So they're kind of shorter questions that are a little more personal and just kind of fun, right?
Yeah.
So what's your favorite food?
For a long time it's been pizza, which is pretty classic, pretty standard, kind of boring. So I would say masala.
Ooh, okay. What's your favorite food that you harvest from the farm?
There were a lot of cucumbers this year, and I was just like kind of loving just like wandering around, just chomping on cucumbers. I really like peppers a lot, tomatoes of course. Onions are just a fundamental piece of pretty much everything that we cook. But yeah, those are some of the heavy hitters.
Now speaking of cooking, what's your favorite dish to make?
Speaking of masala, so I do enjoy, especially when we have our own milk, making a paneer cheese and a thick creamy tomato cream curry sauce, and I would a lentil or chickpeas in it.
All right. So now, kind of moving back into the traditional interview. So with this farm in particular, how would you say that you guys kind of follow the path of Jesus and try to walk the path of Jesus?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, you know, when after the resurrection of Jesus, what happened? The followers came together and shared community life. And, you know, in the book of Acts, we're told that there was, you know, no one hungry among them. They shared their possessions and created a real counter kind of community to the Roman Empire. And, you know, at one point in Acts 17, they're accused of turning the world upside down. So there's something of that I find inspiring and animating, that here's this community following Christ that shares and subverts the dominant order. And, you know, as Jesus confronted, you know, the powers that be in the temple, and, you know, that ongoing kind of challenge to step out of our comfort zone and to be a part of like a resistance to the dominant economic order of the day, you know, whether it's, you know, just the empire, capitalism, or however you want to define that. So yeah, it's you know, we're far from perfect, and we're full of compromises and imperfections. But I think that kind of like that countercultural call of Jesus to, you know, he said, you know, like the Romans, the Gentiles, they sort of lorded over people, but it's not so among you all. You are, you know, supposed to be the servant. You're supposed to be seeking the bottom and serving one another. And so that kind of life of mutual aid and community and striving towards some level of kind of simplicity or downward mobility.
And just so people kind of can get a better understanding of what really happens on this farm in kind of a day-to-day sense, not necessarily day-to-day, but as you said, I'm sure it varies from time of year.
Yeah,
of course.
right.
What are kind of some of the things that you do on this farm, whether it be for this farm, like for this farm, or for the community?
So the growing season, which begins roughly around April through October into November, there's some elements to our days of being out in the gardens and just like actually working with the soil, whether it's planting, weeding, harvesting, mulching, sowing cover crop. So actually just tending to gardens. We each have our roles, whether it's cows or chickens or trees or bees. So some elements of actually just sort of taking care of the land, and then also cooking, also having time for leisure and reading and a little bit of writing. And some of the work that kind of off-farm that I'm engaged in off the farm is working with religious communities, particularly women, Catholic sisters, who are in the process of discerning the future of their lands, property, resources, etc. In the United States, most religious communities, their average age is somewhere in the 80s. And so I'm an organizer who works with several different communities to intersect those conversations they're having around racial and ecological healing. So working on enabling or helping out with relationships or potential partnerships between white folks and Black or Indigenous folks. We started a fund that non-Native people can contribute to help support Native people in the Midwest to buy back land, because we believe that Native people stewarding land is one of the keys to a healthy future. And then we're sharing our produce and sharing in our abundance over the years with Afghan families or Marshallese families or families from all over the world who are here because of war, famine, or whatever, so migrants, refugees, and trying to share some of our good, real food with them. And we offer workshops periodically for the wider community, learning skills, but also a variety of topics. So yeah, we're just kind of involved in a number of different things. We offer celebrations around seasonal feast days, connecting the Christian calendar with the seasonal calendar, and really providing a space for people to come together in prayer and ritual and honoring Creator and creation. And we feel like it's really important that, so much of activism can be about what's the no, what is our critique of society, but what is ultimately our yes? What are we saying yes to? What is our positive vision? And it has to include joy and celebration and community. So we're working on a number of different levels. Again, none of it's perfect, but trying to hold that, the no and the yes, sort of this immense sense of lament that we have about the world and what's happening with this like fundamental joy and kind of laughter and goodness that the world offers as well.
And if you had one message for folks to hear, what would that be?
One message, that's
Or,
tough.
Yeah.
I don't even know. I don't know if I have a single message.
Okay, what's a message that you think is important for people to be thinking about in their daily life?
I think probably one, I think my journey has been in part about greater connection with the land and what are ways that we're connecting with the land, and what are the ways, how is the way that we're living benefiting or being a detriment to the land and the living world. And ultimately, I think that's, kind of a spiritual work, and, we can see that throughout Scripture, the land really offers this place of encountering the divine and the mystery. And so I think it's probably a lot about relationship and connection with the land, and how the way we were living can potentially benefit the land.
And is there anything else that you want folks to know about this farm?
Not that comes immediately to mind. But you've done a good job. Yeah.
All right then. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video from Eric at St. Isidora Catholic Worker Farm. If you did, make sure to hit that like button. If you have any suggestions, please feel free to leave them in the comments, and make sure to subscribe and share a copy link. Have a blessed day.